How to Act, Part 2, Taking Control. Now we're going to move the discussion to more specific advice. Ironically, you can sometimes distill a lifetime of learning into one piece of instruction. For instance, if you tell an actor to be louder, it can almost seem like a patronizing request. Yet there may be an understanding that from that one command, other elements of the performance will naturally improve. By increasing volume, you may change posture, you may improve awareness of sightlines and acoustics, you may change the tension of the scene or the status of the character. Of course, the director could say all these things, but you run the risk of the actor becoming overburdened with too many thoughts to process. As with a golf swing, you often need to make one fundamental change at a time to truly appreciate the impact that it has on the whole action. Try to change too much at the same time and the whole performance could collapse. By just asking the actor to project more, you may enable the other elements to happen almost by osmosis. Instructions do not need to be protracted or polysyllabic. They simply need to be clear enough to be acted upon. Any more than that is redundant and probably wasteful, given the time restraints imposed by most rehearsal periods. The more you can observe other performers, the better. It's helpful in developing your own natural barometer of good and bad technique, but also it opens up the possibility of employing similar techniques in your own practice. There is an important transition from going from the subjectivity as you experience it as an audience member to the objectivity of being a practitioner. In repeatedly viewing others, you should start to reach a state where you can deconstruct their performance rather than just admire the end product. When Stanislavski demystified the acting process, it was with a scientific approach. Taking something apart, examining its smallest element, before then deciding to reconstruct the product from its constituent parts. The act of rebuilding, minuscule piece by minuscule piece, makes us understand what we are doing. It also provides us with a sense of confidence, as no individual unit or objective is overwhelmingly large. On the subject of size, no role is too small. A cliché, yes, and probably not strongly felt by those that have to pay the bills, yet it's certainly true that you can gain acclaim with modest characters. Arguably, some young actors struggle to develop when thrust into substantial roles too soon. Too much of their focus is tied up in learning the character, leaving no space for being objective about the experience. Being able to step outside of and observe one's own work is a desirable luxury that small roles afford us. Many actors invest a substantial proportion of their effort prior to rehearsals and would argue that preparation time is invaluable. Usually with a good piece of character research, only a small percentage ends up in the final performance. But the research is intended more as a stimulus material to your own imagination. Imagination is one of the more effective tools in your repertoire. Imagination will enable you to play a very diverse selection of roles. Try to understand your character, establish motivations, and from that, empathy. As with classical catharsis, we strive to find the humanity within the character. This in turn translates into empathy by the audience. For the audience, this means recognizing that which you portray as genuine, as reflecting their own understanding of human nature. Ironically, styles of acting and concepts of realism change with each passing generation. But the concept of what is truthful seems timeless. Yet, how is it that we can be truthful with radically different styles of performance? Part of that is about being consistent in your role. There needs to be a logical, emotional continuity to your character based on the shared expectations you have established for the audience. This applies as much to fantastical characters as it does to naturalistic and contemporary ones. So far, we've been talking about an internal process, but of course the external process is the one that the audience interacts with. Internal or external, which comes first, this is often a matter of taste and expedience. Looking at character development in retrospect can have a chicken and egg feel about it. As always, it's what works best for you. Use of accent, for instance, is an interesting area. It is often seen as an effective tool in distancing the actor's self from that of the character. An accent does not need to be particularly exotic. It could be as much about different articulation as anything else. As with all character research, try to go back to the original source. Avoid copying the reproduction of another performer, which may have authentic elements, but also will be distorted in other aspects. Repeated physical and verbal imitation will help develop the role, but the onus is on the actor to find authentic sources for their imitation. While there are vocal exercises to help modulate your breathing and projection, the key area is variation. Many actors deliver dialogue in a fixed manner, which an audience soon tires of listening to. It would be as if a musician repeatedly played the same chord. No matter how exquisite that chord, the repetition would diminish our enjoyment. Obviously, there can be times when we deliberately seek to be repetitive, but for the most part we are searching for variation. Actors who successfully engage in this initially experiment with dynamics, fast and slow, loud and quiet, and from there we start to develop an ear for rhythms. And by this I do not mean slavishly following iambic pentameters, but instead getting a sense of the character's verbal inflections based on the emotional choices you have made. The meaning of the text is important, but we start to appreciate the musicality of the text in conjunction with it. The sounds of the word can often have a greater impact than the meaning itself. Here we start to touch upon the concept of tempo rhythm, the idea that your character has a specific vocal, physical, or even emotional rhythm predetermined by the character choices that you've made. Remember, this is the character's rhythm, not your own. Once this rhythm has been established through constant rehearsal and immersion in the role, you should be able to repeat the same level of performance night after night. Rather than internally stumbling for your motivation, emotions and movements should come naturally at the designated time and place. You'll feel that you've got more in common with a dancer or musician whose body parts or breathing are completely choreographed and controlled. With the body, you're not expected to be gifted with beauty or the musculature of an athlete, but you do require flexibility. You will often need to contort your body and voice beyond its normal range. Film actors, particularly, despite access to a variety of special effects, are often made to radically change their physicality. You do not need to lead a frugal existence to protect your body, but do bear in mind that the lifestyle choices you make may impact negatively on that flexibility. Much of what we do is about managing ourselves. Be wary, as the more elements of your performance that slip beyond your control, the more you will relinquish the interpretation of your role. An audience is perfectly entitled to focus on any part of a performance. They will often decide what is significant. So in the absence of any specific meaning that you invest in the character, the audience will impose its own meaning. The vacuum will be filled, and not always as you will like it. Yet, things must appear spontaneous for the audience, particularly in certain genres where there is an expectation of realism. It sounds oversimplified, but you often hear artists talking about deliberately forgetting what they have learned. By this they mean that the hours of study, the training, and the research, while vital, can often result in a contrived product. Art by numbers, if you will. That is where rehearsal and experimentation within it can help develop a more natural feel. Some decisions we make in the process can be completely arbitrary, but in rehearsal we find justification for them. Then next, to go on stage and listen. React in the moment, as opposed to simply reading off lines parrot fashion. Hear things as if for the first time. React intellectually and emotionally as if for the first time. Trust that you are in the role and that the character's rhythms will take over. In TV and film, the biggest challenge is keeping hold of the continuity of the role with non-linear shooting schedules and script alterations. You need to have a strong sense of your character to maintain that through line. Learning your lines early will allow you to familiarize yourself with the language and make some initial informed choices about your role. Going into rehearsals, you will have immediately liberated your body from the concentration required for sight reading. Then, you are more able to experiment with proxemics and eye contact. You can genuinely listen and react to the dialogue of others rather than just simply waiting for cue lines. Usually the actor that sight reads is too preoccupied to enter into an exchange of ideas when direction is given, and that is a missed opportunity. Success brings its own pitfalls. There is a substantial temptation for all actors to replicate their own work, to play variations on the same stock characters again and again. While successful careers can sometimes result from this, you do lay yourself open to criticism of lacking in range. Also, the repetition of a successful technique can often have diminishing returns. As with each outing, elements of originality and creativity are whittled away. You eventually become a parody of a great performance you gave decades previously. Try to treat each new role as if it is your first.